Tonight at the Health and Wealth Revolution, we're going to talk about Lyme disease. We're going to talk about what it really is, why is it spreading, which is really about why do we care to know about it right now. It's the beginning of the summer. And also, what, if anything, can we do about it to prevent it or also to treat it naturally? My name is Bridget Wood. I'm a naturopathic doctor and a co-owner of Awakenings Wellness Center here in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania. So what is Lyme disease? First off, Lyme disease is its nickname. It's really a spirochete infection. And the way it's been defined in medicine is very specific. So in medicine, it's related to one tick, the deer tick or the black-legged tick. It's related to one particular spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi. Burgdorferi is the name of the guy who, on an island between Long Island and Connecticut, discovered and isolated this particular bacteria in a tick. So that's in the locale of Lyme, Connecticut, and that's why they correlated this tick to this illness. Now, the reason we really call it Lyme disease is because in the 1970s, between 75 and 77, something happened in Lyme, Connecticut. There were 31 kids who were diagnosed who all lived on the same street in Lyme, Connecticut with juvenile arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, all around the same time in the summer. And that's really unusual to have that many kids be diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And the doctor that was looking into this was Dr. Alan Steer. So you might have heard of his name associated with Lyme. And after the 39 kids were all identified on the same street at the same time as having, some had bullseye rashes, some didn't, but all showed signs of rheumatoid arthritis in joints. And of course, why would we know anything about that? Because he happened to be a rheumatologist. So there is a connection there. So he identifies this, and later he writes an article called Lyme Arthritis. And it's really about an interesting case of arthritis, a study related to people in Lyme. And he expands his study to include now 51 patients from Old Lyme, New Lyme, and the neighboring town. They're all right there along the coast in Lyme, Connecticut. Now, Lyme disease in this century, and we just started this century, is known as the great imitator. In the last century, there was another disease that was known as the great imitator. In the 1900s, anybody know what it was? Syphilis. So syphilis is also a spirochete infection. I don't know if you're aware of that. And we would put syphilis in a category of lots of venereal diseases. So of course, it was thought that this was strictly passing in that way. But it's very interesting that just 100 years ago, we have another spirochete infection that looks like all kinds of things. And now Lyme disease looks like all kinds of things. So what kinds of things does it look like? Well, right off the bat, we know it looks like rheumatoid arthritis in all ages. But it also, in the chronic state, has a lot of neurological things. So they are misdiagnosing things like MS, multiple sclerosis, or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, or myasthenia gravis, where I have like really tight muscles and pain and sort of extremities. And we could go on through every single one of these neurological illnesses. We could also talk about brain fog. We could talk about lack of focus, trouble with your memory, can't recall names, because when it gets in the brain, these are some of the things you're going to see. The other things we just talked about are when it gets in the nervous system, and before that with arthritis, when it gets in the joints. But wherever these spirochetes go, they're looking for nutrients. And that's why you start to see these problems occur in the body. So let's talk about co-infections, because really this great imitator is not alone. And the best way to understand this spirochete is not acting alone is to understand why this even is. Why are we talking about a tick? Why are we talking about one specific spirochete? It's a very complex bacteria. It looks a little bit like a worm. He's bigger than most other bacteria. He's smarter. He actually has a tail coming out either end. He can burrow. He has enzymes to burrow through any tissue, liquid or solid. He can get anywhere, including your bones. So that's who we're dealing with. And let's talk about how did he get in there. So we'll talk about the tick. How does a tick feed? So tick goes through various life cycles. And before a female tick drops eggs, they must engorge fully with blood. Now they feed off blood in other stages too. They go through 4 stages, and there's actually some pictures of ticks in the thing that I handed out. You can find the deer tick 3 pages in, you'll see it in there. So when the tick goes through these stages, first off, let's say he lands on you, right? He's actually, the ticks are crawling up on some kind of vegetation, and you are out in nature, and you have some skin that is not covered because it's summer and you're hot. And you walk around and the tick jumps off the vegetation, it picks up on your carbon dioxide, your sweat, and your breath, and it jumps on you. Now once it jumps on, it's looking for a good place to latch. It immediately, when it bites you, injects something that is anesthetizing, so that you don't know the tick is there. So you might feel the tick walking on you, which gives you a shot at getting rid of it. But once he's getting ready to bite, he's going to put an analgesic in there so that you don't know he's there anymore. And the next thing he's going to do is he's going to do that analgesic, he has to actually bite you first, and he has to put some of his saliva, which is where this analgesic is coming from, inside your blood. He also puts in an anticoagulant because he's going to be like drilling here, mining for a while. So he needs to keep this blood moving. He doesn't want that hole to seal up. So he keeps flushing it with anticoagulant. Now he then builds basically a fingernail over top his head and around his body. So keeps this nice big, think of it like a well of blood he's created, and a fingernail over his head. That's why they're hard to get off. It's made of keratin. And now he's left alone to do what he wants to do. And so what he's going to do is he's going to bring blood out of you and fill this little area. He's going to feed, and then just like a cow, he's going to spit in this and regurgitate and swallow and regurgitate. And what he's doing is he's mixing his gut flora, his gut bacteria, with this blood meal. So what do you think his gut flora is designed for? Break down blood. That's the whole point of it. So everything that's in his gut flora has special actions for different parts of blood. But this tick is not just a deer tick. He's a black-legged tick. He doesn't just go, oh, are you a deer? Oh, no, you're a human. I shouldn't eat you. I'll go over here. He's actually going to feed off of up to 200 different species of animals. And when we look at the whole realm of ticks, we're not really just talking about the deer tick. All ticks feed in this manner. And they will try to stay on as long as they can. It takes them about 24 to 36 hours to fill to full engorgement if they're adults. Younger ticks don't feed so long, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be infected by a younger tick. Within a 4-minute period, they have exchanged that saliva, and they've already got some spirochetes going on right there at that site. So within 4 minutes of being there, if he breaks the skin, you're swapping stuff. So he's going to put in things that affect your blood, and he's going to really fill that area near him. That's what you don't want to let get infected, full of his bacteria, because he wants to start breaking down the blood products, so the red blood cells. He wants to break down your white blood cells, your plasma, minerals, even diseases that you have, he has to deal with. And your blood is hot, and he is actually not a hot-blooded animal. Ticks are cold-blooded. So his temperature is going to massively increase. And a lot of these spirochetes are there to help him deal with all of these complex aspects to his feeding technique. So now you understand why the focus is on the tick, but don't get lost on it's a deer tick, because that makes us think only the deers have a problem. And if we didn't just go around the deers, we'd be okay, right? So we live in a land like full of deers here in Pennsylvania. So yes, those deers do have deer ticks. I can tell you, these ticks would love to be on deers primarily. But we don't have herds of hundreds of thousands of deers or elk moving through the United States anymore, or buffaloes for that matter. These migrating herbivores, the ruminids that used to eat the grass, the grazers, this was the predominant way that ticks moved across the land. Well, guess what? They don't move as much as you do anymore. So you're a great host, but you have a really strong immune system. So they have to be able to adapt, and that's what these guys do. They are, of the bacteria, they are highly adaptable. every time they replicate, which is not as often as a regular bacteria. A regular bacteria is within minutes, we're talking about. Every 20 to 40 minutes, we're replicating. These bacteria are more complicated, and they replicate every 1 to 2 days. So it's a big difference in time, which is why it's very hard to manage these guys in the lab. But they're not there alone. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with the co-infections in the next section. So if it really were just this guy, he's still bad, this Borrelia burgdorferi. But let me ask you this. You guys have gut flora. How many bacteria do you think populate your gut? I mean, we see even our probiotics have 6 to a dozen. VSL had like 30 different strains of bacteria. You should be collecting bacteria off your food from the dirt particles that are left on your food if you're not scrubbing it perfectly, which you don't want to be because you do want to get some of those things. They're really helpful for your immune system. So your guts have been designed based on the food you eat. There's an interaction between this gut flora and what we eat because it's there designed to break down what we eat, which is why whatever you eat determines how your gut flora looks. Well, ticks are pretty much interested in blood. They've convinced themselves blood is the banquet they're looking for. But we all have blood, so we, not just deer, humans, we travel all over the world, so we take these ticks with us because we take all of their gut flora with us. Now the important thing is, unless you guys have lived inside a bubble since birth, who here has not had a tick bite? Anybody? 1, 2, maybe 3? Okay. Who here hasn't been bitten by other blood-sucking animals? Horseflies, sandflies at the beach. Anybody? Mosquitoes. That's another blood, and they all have the same kind of flora. Don't kid yourself. The tick is not the worst one. He just feeds the longest. Okay? So bed bugs. Bed bugs are in the tick family. They're a branch. They feed only at night. Lice, mites. There are all these animals, and they're all in a handout here. We'll go through that in the next section a little bit more deeply. But we are not talking about one type of tick and one type of bacteria, one single species of that type, because there are over 22 species that have been identified. Now, we don't talk about any of this because medicine used to be about germs. But somehow, if you live in America, you have this magnificently wonderful life because there are no germs allowed here in America in humans. Your dogs and cats are welcome to have germs and pathogens and parasites, but you don't have them, apparently. It's amazing. I don't know how you do it. But in other countries, if you visit them, good luck. You're bringing home whatever is over there, but somehow America does not allow immigration of parasites, which is amazing. So let's talk about something else. You have a picture of the United States. I'll hold it up. We could say Lyme started here. We could say that. But believe it or not, the bullseye rash was discovered in Europe first, not here. So really didn't start here. But this is America actually calling it Lyme, named after a city in America in Connecticut. So it kind of became our disease, right? It became our problem. So we see the spread of Lyme really from Connecticut moving out. But by the way, if you could see Canada on this map, it's spreading very well into Canada as well. If you would just kind of see it, it's going right up here because ticks here get on birds and birds migrate all over the place. So these deer ticks don't know if it's a bird, it's a deer, they go for animals, whatever they can get on. And over here we have Michigan as a center, or Wisconsin. And Wisconsin actually is where the dermatologist who identified the bullseye rash in the United States, that's where he practiced. So he wrote an article about the bullseye rash, which is why you see people becoming aware. So if they have a bullseye rash, they go, oh, I got Lyme, right? But how many people have a bullseye rash with Lyme? It's less than 20%. Wow. Now, the doctors will tell you less than 50%. But that's true, too, because less than 20 is also less than 50. So it's the truth, but it's not exactly the actual truth. So it's true, but it's not the truth. Let's put it that way. So we do see this because of knowledge, right? So, you know, you have Lyme, you tell your neighbors about it, you watch TV together on your local news, it breaks out here. So there's an awareness thing that's happening. But now we have Lyme reported in every single state in the United States, and we have Lyme reported in Europe, all over Europe and many other countries. So as it turns out, spirochete infections are very common. So then how come we don't all have Lyme? Because all of us are outside, we get bit by all these blood-sucking insects, and it's because for the majority of the population, if you're healthy, your immune system fights this off. These are the same bugs that have been around for since mammals have been around. So you have a relationship with these guys, and they should not be a problem for you. But the real question is going to come in, well, why are they such a problem? And a growing problem at that. So now let's talk about when this all started, what was going on. So we have a dermatologist playing a role, we have a rheumatologist playing a role. So this is how we know this disease is related to arthritis in the skin. Because the majority of studies about this are about arthritis in the skin. And if you show up with a neurological condition, because they like to get into the central nervous system, they kind of don't want to talk to you. They're like, I don't know what your problem is. You don't have a skin condition and you don't have rheumatoid arthritis, so maybe you don't have Lyme. Okay, well maybe I do. But that's not what I know. And so we're really going to talk about the fact that very few doctors have become literate in Lyme. And this has been going on since the 70s. So it's on the news, we all know about it. Anybody that lives around deers has heard about this, but the doctors themselves, they are really ill-equipped for this. And we're going to talk about later what it means to find a Lyme literate doctor to work with. And that's going to be a functional medicine or an integrative medicine type of doctor who is actually studied specially and attends every single Lyme conference because it changes all the time. So what happened back in the 80s and the 90s that might have disrupted funding for Lyme? Because it doesn't seem like anybody cares about it. Well, it turns out that in the 80s or 90s, we had another disease going around called AIDS and HIV. And AIDS is viral, and the CDC got involved with it. And over here we have another parasite infection. It's bacterial. Why wasn't the CDC involved in that? Why weren't we dealing with it as an infectious disease? Because just a rheumatologist and a dermatologist were talking about it. So there's no reason to think of it as an infectious disease, even though we already have the parasite identified. So a lot of the money went to HIV and AIDS, and very little, if any, money and attention went to Lyme. And that's pretty much why we haven't come that far. And doctors are not fully aware or versed in this, nor do they mostly attend these conferences and know what's going on. So you have to be careful who your doctor is. Wait a second. Now let's talk about one other thing. I'm going to throw in a couple of things here. Why Lyme, Connecticut? Why Wisconsin? We can say, well, it's because that's where they detected it first and they wrote the article. But don't you think it's kind of weird that out of the blue, 39 or 51 people, 39 kids get rheumatoid arthritis in this little tiny town on the coast of Connecticut called Lyme, on the same street, in the same couple of months. If you were the rheumatologist, you'd think, like, what the heck's going on? You know, like 39 of my clients have show up and it's a mess out there. Something weird's happened. That's why they wrote the article. They said, hey, just here in Lyme, we got a problem, nowhere else. Well, as it turns out, there was something going on just across the water, 9 miles. There was a military lab over there called Lab 257. There's a book called Lab 257. Because now this is sort of a big deal, and lawyers got involved because people were like suing, you know, for all the money it costs them to have Lyme disease. And they said, why did it happen in Lyme? And as it turns out, there's an island right across from Lyme, Connecticut, 8 miles off the coast called Plum Island. And it's now closed as a military facility, but it was basically a warfare, and they were looking at biological warfare, which of course we're not supposed to do, but we know we do it anyways. So they were actually studying ticks. Now, they were studying viruses. We dropped them in World War II over Russia. We now know the proof of that looking back. At this time, they were looking right after World War II. We even know the doctor who did it. I wrote it down there, Dr. Eric Traub. He went to the Rockefeller Institute. He was a virologist. And he was involved and oversaw the whole tick program. And they were dropping these ticks all over the airway, which was out on the end of the island. They thought the ticks would never be able to get off the island. The ticks are little, right? How'd they get on a boat, right? They can't get off this island. We're safe. We can study them here. Well, that was right after World War II. So maybe it took the ticks a while to get over the water, but it's only 8 minutes and birds fly that far for sure. So the bottom line is it's still spreading from that island. And if you were to go to Long Island, especially on the northern shore, you will see tick warning signs. And I mean, they look really dangerous and scary. They tell you do not walk off the path. Do not go in the woods. These ticks are very tiny and they'll jump on you in the millions. So, you know, you won't even know. Without a black light, you wouldn't even know you were covered in ticks. One of them will get a hold of you for sure, but you can be bit multiple times. If you happen not to take a shower, get into bed, you're going to have many, many, many bites. And you might not even think you had a tick because there's so many and they're all babies. They're all little, but they're just as virulent. So now let's talk about the diagnostics, because now we're getting a little bit into, well, how do we solve this? How did medicine get involved? You know, we need a diagnosis before we can treat anything. So we do have some tests that they use. So first off, this bullseye rash. Less than 20% of people have it, and the people that do have it don't always know they have it. What if a tick bites you in your hair? Like, do you do this and look in the mirror and, you know, with special lenses every night to see if you've got a bullseye rash? No way. No way. So a lot of times you would never see it. If it's on the back of your leg, you might never see it. On the back of your body, it's only there for a short period of time, and you might have a flu after that. That's the acute state of this. So if that's the case, if you see the bullseye rash, what should you do? Go straight to the doctor. They will now treat you for Lyme with antibiotics, and it's pretty well known. It's doxycycline, and a few other things in the cocktail. And yes, you need to be on it for longer than usual, but at least you kill it at the site. There are some natural things you can do, but I wouldn't mess around. But while you're taking those antibiotics from your doctor, I don't care what the doctor says, take probiotics. Because you can't kill your gut flora while you're trying to kill these bacteria, because when you swallow it, where is that antibiotic going? In your guts. So that's a problem. So anytime you take antibiotics, you should be ramping up the probiotics. So there's a couple of other tests they use. The ELSA test, which is like an inflammatory, looking for IG markers of the immune system. It's not a good test. It barely gets, the false negatives are huge. But what do the doctors say? We don't have any false negatives. This test is very effective if the bacteria is actively moving through the blood and you have an active infection. Well, what are the chances? What are the chances the active infection is where they take the blood? These guys are mobile. They also cyst up. The amazing thing about them is if your immune system is intact, they try to hide inside your cells, they try to hide inside your tissues, they try to get into your central nervous system where you got nothing to fight them. And they also make cysts. They build biofilms, which is good to hide in, just like you're supposed to have a mucosa layer to protect all your bacteria. But if that goes down, you got nothing. So that test doesn't work very often. Maybe we're talking about 60% of people that have absolute full-blown Lyme still get a negative ELSA. From time to time, they might get a positive one, but a lot of negatives. So we know, even on a positive case, it's negative. So that doesn't tell you much. Western blot is a much better test, but then there's something called a Western blot or Lyme bingo out there. They tell you, in order for a diagnosis, you need 5 bands. But I will tell you, if you have even 1 band, you have a spirochete infection and it's time to do something. But you will not be diagnosed with Lyme with 1 band, or 2, or 3, or 4. You must have 5. So we're narrowing, again, this tick, that spirochete, how many bands. Now, you want a really good test, you can pay a fortune and go to IGeneX out of California. It's a genetic test. It's pretty extensive, but if they don't prep you for these tests by causing an inflammatory response and kick these guys out of cysts, you won't see anything even with that, because they're still going to take blood. And then there's a whole bunch of other blood tests, CD57, C4A, C3A, blah, blah, blah. So this way you need a Lyme literate doctor. These are the tests that they use today. Now, acute versus chronic. Acute is I got a bite, I maybe have a bullseye, maybe I don't. I have a flu, maybe I don't. Because every time I get bit, I don't necessarily have a reaction. Maybe my immune system is super strong. I have very low stress in my life, and it just takes care of it right at the spot. Everybody cysts up, hides, we're all good. And that will be how most of your life will go, hopefully, maybe all your life. But let's say this gets a hold of you and you just lost your job. Got a lot of stress, right? Or let's say you just lost a loved one. Let's say you're a caretaker. You stress every day. Let's say, could Could be relationship problems. Could be anything. Could be you have a child who's sick. All of these things are going to suppress your immune system. Let's say you love ice cream at night before bed. That's enough to suppress your immune system every single night. Let's say you have insomnia and you can't sleep for a variety of reasons. All these things are going to cause cortisol to go up. So you're in fight or flight all the time. You're not resting. You're not repairing. Your immune system is really being taxed. If you eat all the time, you will not have a very good immune system, because doing that it's either rest, digest, or repair. We don't get to do all three at the same time. So you got to be careful about that. What's it look like chronic? All these crazy diseases. Depends on where it is. And now we're talking about antibiotics, probiotics, herbs. There are some electronic things. We're talking about pulsed electromagnetic devices and fields, heat, sunshine. These are all things that we need to look at for, like, why is this happening? All right, part two. Part two, why is this spreading and why do we care? So take a look again at this map. Do you see Pennsylvania on this map?
Yes.
Is Pennsylvania in, like, the most, like, populated with Lyme disease cases area? Yeah, I was going to say, there's nothing about Pennsylvania that's not red, okay? We are literally the reddest of all of them. There's even a part of New York where they don't have as many cases, probably not as many people. But all the way up and down here, you can see, and we are definitely in a hot spot. We have plenty of green out there, plenty of nature. We get out in the outdoors. And so we need to seriously know about this every time the summer shows up. And the next thing I want you to do is take a look at the next page. And let's talk about Lyme disease. Now this goes up to 2009. I wish I could have found one from 2009 to today, but what you should know is this just keeps going up. There's 300,000 reported cases a year now. That's from last year's results. 300,000 reported cases a year. Now I want you to look at this because there's some politics here. The little band on the bottom, that's reported Lyme cases. Because with most diseases, they don't come along and actively take away your diagnosis. But with Lyme disease, they do. There are some legal issues here. Because of that little war project, there are patents on a lot of these bugs. The military has patents on a ton of mycoplasms, which are in majority of all the North American ticks who are infected with this particular spirochete. Like 65% of the ticks with this spirochete have a load of these special mycoplasms. Mycoplasms have been around since mammals started, but not all of them have patents. That's like the weird part, right? Like patented animals, it's whoa. Okay, so to make sure nobody gets sued, nobody is allowed to die with Lyme, period. So if you have Lyme, they get a diagnosis from that ELSA, from a genetic test, from the BANS test, the Western blot, then they must treat you with a prolonged course of antibiotics. There are certain protocols what they're going to do. Some will do maybe 3 weeks, some will do 6 weeks, some will do 6 months. They're very nervous when they do it if they haven't done it regularly. But let's say they do it and you survive all that. And then you go home, you're feeling better, everything's good. Even if you felt better halfway through, you wanted to quit. They're like, no, keep going. Okay, keep taking them. So you go home and there's stress in your life, and a couple of years later, your neck starts to hurt, or your knee starts to swell, or you have all these secondary symptoms. You go back and say, like, something is not right. And you just keep going back and going back. They just keep saying, no, we cured that Lyme. Remember, you had that treatment and you said you were good. And you say, well, I don't think you got it all. Well, there are a lot of rules about whether or not I can retest you after you've been through treatment. And by the way, after 5 years, I just take you off the diagnosis anyways. So you no longer have it if you don't come and report it again. So this is complicated. And so I want you to know that, look, in 2009, there were 38,000 actual cases in diagnosis and or treatment. But look at all the cases that had been previously diagnosed that were, like, taken off the list. And also, so the CDC said, well, we know, based on the results that we have, that it's either 6 times or 12 times higher than what's being reported. Now reporting is much better, but imagine 6 to 12 times higher than 300,000 new cases every year. And just because they're rolling people off the rolls, does it really mean that they didn't have a bad incident with a Lyme infection? No, they did. And they've got maybe a lot of population in there that one day is going to wake up and haunt them if they have an event in their life. So it's important, like dig the well now or wait till you're really thirsty. Are you going to be able to dig when you're really thirsty? No, so get the well done now. Okay, so now we're going to talk about like co-carriers, co-infections, and big coincidence, because this is really why we care. So co-carriers, I gave you a handout. You'll see all the other blood-sucking animals, insects I should say. So ticks, we said ticks stay on the longest. Of course, if they drop off, they try to jump back on. They got to feed till they're full. But look at all the list of things that you can find in ticks, and they have an analgesic saliva, so you don't even know they're there. These are just 3 Borrelia. This, by the way, is from a veterinary textbook, a medical veterinary textbook. And the veterinary textbook, it talks about all the parasites that humans can get. That's so surprising, isn't it? Because the human parasite book doesn't talk about it. So I was like, that's really strange. I don't know. So that's where I found it. And this is all about where we get human infections from the veterinary medical textbook, which I thought was fabulous. So you can see all the things, and they know they've linked Borrelia burgdorferi and Serena, which comes directly from birds. And they kind of give these things names based on where they find them and isolate them. But I'm going to tell you, all the Borrelias are related. And when they get on a host, they start mutating to adapt to that host. So these guys mutate every time they replicate. Every 24 to 48 hours, they change their stripes just to be better and better at what they do. This Borrelia recurrens causes a recurrent fever. It looks a lot like hot flashes or night sweats. So curious. Tularemia is something they also carry. That also causes hot flashes and sweats. Babesia is an amoeba that actually goes inside and destroys red blood cells. Makes you very anemic. So you can see why it works for a tick to have Babesia. Most of them have Babesia, and there's many, many, many species of Babesia too. Ehrlichia, rickettsia is actually Rocky Mountain spotted fever. You have some other Colorado, spotted fevers, but basically it's all ticks, it's all spirochetes, it's all different kinds. We're talking about over 200 species have been identified. And if you go to the last page, I just went and pulled like the first research paper I could find, because they're now starting to show up, where this is like a taxonomist nightmare. If you go by our rules, technically these are all spirochetes. There's tons of them. And if you go back one more page, let me just show you what we're dealing with here. This sometimes keep it simple, right? A little kiss, never hurt anybody. So we have like round bacteria over here on this side, and these are the ones we know about, like Coccus bacteria, and we see how they're like singles, they're in chains, pairs, and clusters. These are your, bacterial coccuses. So you have all your Coccus cymidus and all these different things. You would have your strep and staph, all that kind of stuff. These are the simple guys. Over here, you have rods, and some of the rods have flagellas. Now they're starting to have like a mobility. But over here, the spirochetes have amazing mobility. They're smart. They do strategic things. They build communities and cities, and they let their friends move into them with them. So these guys, you don't want them. They're like smart as worms. They're smarter than worms even. So that's what you're dealing with. And so they draw the Borrelia one way, and they draw Treponema another, and they draw this other little Spirilla another way. But I could tell you they all kind of look like this, and there's hundreds of them. Not that one little guy we were talking about. Every time a tick bites you, he drops off all of his flora. So you're going to get a sample, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 different strains, all kinds of species, whatever he's been feasting on. Maybe he already had a meal, he picked up something there, he's dropping it off with you too. So that's what we're dealing with. So we're talking about lots more than one carrier, not just one type of tick, but many ticks. We're talking about, they've found spirochetes in over 200 different species of animals. So every mammal you can pretty much bet, but also reptiles, birds, everybody has some spirochetes. And so now we ask ourselves, well, the deer, we know they have spirochetes. Well, why is it that this deer tick, and we're like looking at this one thing, because that's the last big grazing animal left in the United States. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
I apologize for being late.
No worries. Okay. So basically we have the last herd of animals here in the United States. The buffaloes are gone, we have deer, but they don't roam in here herds like elk across the US. They just hide between our yards, right? So we're mixed in with them. But the deer used to have something wonderful, which was national parks where they could spread out and not be afraid of being hunted during certain seasons. And so that's where they used to live. And in those national parks, there used to be a lot of weeds and things. Then the deer turn out they really are herbologists. They know when to eat stuff when they get sick. Like your cat knows if it needs to throw up a hairball, it's got to eat some grass, right? These animals are smarter than we give them credit for. So when a deer has got an infection with spirochetes, a deer will eat thistles. A horse that has certain parasitic infections knows to eat thistle plants. Most large mammals know that thistles are thistle plants for a reason. They have much higher content of nutrition and alkaloids. They are the drugs of the grazing animals. Now, in the spring, thistles are soft. In the later summer, they're very hard, and they will actually break the mouth and everything of these animals. So what they do is very prophylactic. They're very smart. They do preventive medicine. In the spring, they eat every last thistle they can find. Now, here we come into the national parks. We're, lovely park visitors. And we get out of our car, we take our picnic blanket, we take our Frisbees, we go out into the big fields that they've mowed down for us so we can hang out there. And we're running along and we get little thistles and we get things stuck on us. Well, people complained. So they started, when Americans started entering the parks and camping, they started a campaign and they went out and sprayed specifically to get rid of thistle plants. And the reason I know this is because there are several NDs who were associated with my school and other schools that were researching Lyme disease and its growth patterns. And they were going to the parks to wild harvest thistles, which are very useful in cleaning up the neurotoxins that these guys are releasing into the body and helping you to move them out. And they have lots of mineral nutrients. And while they were there harvesting these, they noticed that they disappeared one year. They're just gone. So they went to another park. Oh, they were gone there too. They were gone here too. They were gone there. They're gone everywhere. And when they laid a map of the park spraying, when they finally figured out where we were spraying all these parks, you can see Lyme growing in people wherever these parks are being sprayed, because the Lyme spirochetes are now getting concentrated in these grazing animals, the deer that move in and out of our yards. So we're now in very close contact with them, their ticks, their environment, and we're being used as grazing animals too. So when they killed the thistles, they killed the natural immunity of the deers. The deers became reservoirs for these bacterial infections. The deers move among us, more of the ticks. They actually concentrate the virulence of this bacteria, and now we see it just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So co-infections. This is the other problem. We're not talking about just some spirochetes. There's other stuff in the blood. Babesia I talked about. It's a protozoa, also a smart little bugger. He goes straight for your red blood cells, creates massive anemia, tremendous fatigue, so you barely get out of bed sometime when he goes crazy. You've got viruses. Many of them you already have or you got from different sources. HPV is very common, the human papilloma virus, wart virus. It actually retards the immune system. Every time you're stressed, it comes back out on your nerves. You have herpes, which does the same thing, these very nerve loving. And you have Epstein-Barr, for example, which probably came to you in meat at some point. And this Epstein-Barr is in the liver and it kind of stays there, and making you very fatigued. And there are many, many other flu and hepatitis and all sorts of nasty little viruses that we have. All these viruses, they stay in the body if your body doesn't detox well. So if our lymphatics are clogged, if we don't move around, if we don't eat healthy, viruses are like toxins that build up in the body, and they make the body less able to fight off these other more smart infections. Viruses kind of hang out, but they do a lot of damage to your immune system. Also, we have fungus. Now, why would we have massive problems with candida overgrowth? That's really one change in our diet. They said, oh, fat is bad, sugar, good. Fat's got to go. When fat goes, flavor goes. Oops, nobody wants to eat. Oh, we're going to prepare all the foods in advance. They taste terrible. So we need to add some chemicals to make them taste good, but the fat's not in there. So I got to put something to make you eat them. Let's try sugar. And sugar's cheap. So we went from eating 4 pounds of sugar a year to 140 pounds of sugar a year on average. That's a big jump in sugar. And with that, here comes the yeast that live with us very nicely, become candida and grow everywhere. And they actually like colonize organs and start to eat them. We don't do holding questions till the end.
Can you take a picture of this?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So Babesia, viruses, funguses, these have made it very hard to heal this in the medical community because they're not really, they acknowledge viruses as epidemics only. Once you don't have an outbreak, we don't need to treat you for that. Babesia, they're not really sure they know much about that. That is a protozoa. They try to ignore those, like toxoplasmosis from your cat. They kind of ignore that. By the way, you get some of that too. And funguses, they're not really sure what to do with that either because that involves food. And we're not supposed to talk about food. So basically, we're out of luck with that as well. So over here on this side, I got the bacteria, but these are complex bacteria that they don't have any kind of antibiotics for that are going to be foolproof. Things like mycoplasm are giving us a hell of a time. Mycoplasm, ureaplasm, anaplasms, these guys they don't have a membrane. And our antibiotics, we're lucky that we have a couple antibiotics. We use them for 40 years. We have a lot of resistant strains on the things they do kill. So we're in trouble now. These tools are almost gone for us. The bugs got a lot smarter. But on top of that, with a mycoplasm that has no casing, then we don't have anything that kills it because we're using the membrane, 1 or 2 membranes, to actually kill the bacteria. That guy has nothing on the outside. So, and he's really tiny. Where my spirochete's like a monster, the little mycoplasm can fit like hundreds of thousands of his buddies inside of your cells. So he can easily hide in a cell where there's a less effective immune system. And then we've got, like we talked about all the spirochetes. Borrelia is one family, brachiospirochetes, leptospirochetes, Ehrlichia, rickettsia, that's the Rocky Mountain one. So much stuff, but I wanted you to know the complexity of this because this is why medicine is ignoring it. It's really all of this on this page. And this is really what they report. There's really way more. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of species of these bacteria being moved around by blood-eating insects. And we are now the grazing herd that's a part of their cycle. So you kind of have a feel of this stuff. Chlamydia is also involved with that. There's a lot of chlamydia happening here. Now, who knows if chlamydia has just been around in our culture. Like we were talking about, syphilis was the great imitator of the 1900s. It's a spirochete infection. Believe it or not, gingivitis is a spirochete infection, treponema. They eat your teeth, enamel, and they eat your bones too. So that's why take care of your mouth, because when they finish with your mouth, they go find a bone nearby. So all these guys are trying to get away from your immune system or suppress it or cause it to go crazy by kicking off a cytokine reaction or kicking off an inflammatory reaction every single day. So your adrenal glands are like, whoa, here we are again. We've got to do this again. Next slide. All right, so now let's talk about coincidence. So why are we all so sick? Because we have these great immune systems. We can outsmart them at the site. But there's a lot of other things that have been going on. So we talked about the thistle spraying. That's been going on since we started visiting our parks, but really heavily started in the 70s and 80s. So, but they didn't hit all the parks and they didn't hit them often enough. Now they pretty much wiped out a lot of the native thistle plants, which is why you can go to the park and not get thistles all over you, which makes you happy, but shouldn't be too happy because you got another problem. All right, so since the 1900s and we could say the 1950s, we've had a tremendous decline in the quality of nutrient density in our soil. The organic matter in the soil, the humus, is pretty much gone because they now just put a few chemicals on the soil. They don't use any natural fertilizers, and so you don't have a chance for any of that to build up, and therefore our foods are deficient in minerals, severely deficient in minerals. Minerals are what gives you like a base, a strong base, a strong chi, electrical energy. It's coming from salts and minerals interacting in the body. A lot of enzymes require certain minerals to be tagged on one side or the other. So, in fact, the most important minerals involve zinc, copper, manganese, magnesium. You run out of any of those, you're going down fast, I'll tell you right now. Now let's talk about, there's a great book, from the soil to the stomach. It was released, I don't know, 10 years ago or something by an ND. Fabulous book, talks about how we see like a decline in health in general, and we're seeing ADHD and all these other things right along with the decline of our soils and our food quality. So you think it looks pretty, but they use sprays and things to ripen it up in the truck, and we've got high technology. And so this beautiful food, we hope it's as good as it looks. Colors signal us, so they want to make sure it's got good colors because our brain says that is vitamins and nutrients. Now, if you buy carefully, you can have a lot of vitamins and nutrients, and you should try to get most of them from the food, because the minute I open up that lemon, it's oxidizing because it has an antioxidant in it called vitamin C. And it's not just one thing. It's not ascorbic acid. It's actually bioflavonoids, and there's hundreds of those compounds. You know, if you talk about the colors in the berries and stuff, you know, those are actually signals to us that there's a lot of molecules in there that are very rich in nutrition and natural antioxidants for us. So these are things that are going to help us rebuild our body if we have them every day. And we're totally signaled to go for it. But what if they paint the fruit with a color? Or what if they artificially, like they bring it in green and then they ripen it up in a truck with some chemicals? So they're very good at tricking us. And so what I say is what really happened here, big coincidence, since the late 1800s, we had the introduction and growth of a huge industry in farming. So we got rid of our regular farmers, our family farms, our entrepreneurs, and we replaced them with these huge mono farms where they grow like one thing: wheat, corn. They grow so much corn, it's unbelievable. We feed corn to everything, all the animals that then you in turn eat, even the fish. I don't think fish have corn under the water. I don't know how they got the corn idea for the fish, but the fish said, oh, I don't know, if that's the only thing you feed me, I'm gonna eat it. So this is where your farm caught fish, they're being fed GMO corn. Like all of the animals that are not being, you know, specifically organically farm raised, which is all the industrial meats. So cheap meat, think no nutrition, and also think corn. Cheap meat is corn, basically, and it's all GMO'd and nasty and full of antibiotics, full of pesticides and herbicides and other drugs and things. So be careful when you're thinking about meat. So they introduced the first fake food back in the late 1800s. It was Procter & Gamble. They made candles, and they sold candles. That was like their big thing. And soap. Candles and soap. That's what they did. Soap opera came from that. These companies advertising to women at home, soap opera. While you're cleaning at home, you're watching the TV. That's what it was all about. So these guys said, man, that guy, that Thomas Edison guy, he's a mess. He created some crazy old light bulb. They're probably never going to be able to get that off the ground. Who would want one of those anyways? Wires in your house sounds terrible. But what if they do? We got to be prepared for that. We need a cheap source of fat. And they went to the cotton mills in the South and they said, these stinky old cotton seeds that are rancid and everything, what if you pay us to haul them away? We'll take your trash away. And they said, seriously? Yeah, we're paying somebody else. We'll pay you, no problem. You'll do it for a little less? Okay, no problem. Hauled all those cotton seeds away. German scientist comes in, they create Crisco. Another company creates margarine out of that. They have to like doctor it up in lots of ways and process it like crazy and put color things in there. And why weren't we thinking during those days? And they said to us things like, this fat is so much better than lard. You know, the one you're keeping in the can, the coffee can under the sink? That stuff's nasty. You should use this nice clean Crisco. It's so beautiful and it's light. And then this woman named Betty Crocker, who never existed, published a fabulous cookbook. That was Procter & Gamble, and taught you how to use margarine and Crisco for all of your cooking needs. Oh, and then other Kraft foods and Procter & Gamble foods. And so you kind of got it. You're like, oh, I'm the housewife, I'm watching the soap opera, and now I know how to cook. That's so fantastic. I'll throw my butter out because that's apparently killing me. And I'll get rid of all my lard, and I will cook with Crisco, and I will serve my kids margarine so I can save their life. That's what I'm going to do. And that's how it happened. And that happens in the early 1900s, and health declines slowly, slowly from that point on. This is where we first get Weston A. Price. As a dentist, he retires. He says, man, all my people suddenly got sick. I don't know what the heck's going on. He goes to indigenous countries and he looks at the people who aren't even brushing their teeth and they all got perfect teeth. And he says, like, what's happening here? There's no toothpaste secret. There's no mouthwash secret. They rub a stick on their, gums every once in a while, but like, why are they so healthy? And he studied the diets, put together some components, and that's the foundation of all nutrition, pretty much, what Weston A. Price went and found, because they all had some components that were the same. But I can tell you, fat was a big, important part of it, and we didn't find a single healthy vegetarian community anywhere in the world. All right, so now let's talk about the next thing. What else happened? They somehow convinced us that water wasn't safe. Even though they cleaned it at the plant, it would be better if we put some toxins in it from our mining industry, the fluorides from the mining industry, which we're going to tell you will kill the bacteria in the water, and maybe your teeth will be better because you won't be getting the bacteria or Giardia or things like that from your water. And they said, look, we have a little study that shows that the people who work in the fluoride factories, they don't have as many cavities. They also didn't have any teeth. They all lost their teeth working in the fluoride factory. So I guess you don't have teeth, you don't have cavities. It's amazing. But they did tell, the truth. It just really wasn't the whole truth. So you got fluoridation of water that happens all over the United States. California just picked it up. It was such a good idea. It took California 50 years. Finally, they succumbed. Preservatives got added because this is an industrial thing. Farmers don't add preservatives, but the guys who sell the stuff that the farmers make, and they're going to carry it to the grocery store and it's going to sit there for a while and they want you to buy it, they need to preserve it so they don't have a lot of waste. So they start coming up with great ideas for how to preserve foods. By the way, you eat a preserved food, you're preserving this food right here. It's, it's going to last, but it ain't going to be so good in that state. It's not going to work, but it's going to last. Look like a ham, actually. Then we have toxic fats. They said, these guys said, hey, if we're cooking with this stuff and we're eating this stuff and nobody's dying, they said, let's just put it in more foods. They said, how about soup? They came up with Campbell's soup at the old Procter & Gamble company. And they said, here, we'll test it. We'll test it on humans. So we won't put any of the lard in there, which is expensive. We'll put in the Crisco. That darn soup just lasts forever. They needed to have a soup drive because darn soup never went bad. They're like, give us back your soup after 10 years. Please don't eat it. You might die of botulism or something. We don't know. So that happened. And they eventually told us fats are bad, 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 including all the ones that were good, 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 like all the saturated fats that were keeping all of our relatives very healthy. And keep your immune system very functional and protect all of your lining. All the interior lining requires fat. Requires water, fat, and protein. That's what mucus is. And so let's look at what else happened. So fake sugars were introduced. We had all this corn growing for fuel, growing to feed the animals, growing to feed us. And they said, hey, how about some high fructose corn syrup? This is where they turned regular sugar into heroin. And they said, let's see if we can addict these people through the sugar. If they don't have any fat, they never get full. If I can get them to eat enough of this really super duper high glycemic index fake sugar, they will probably lose their minds and just start eating all the time. And then later we'll tell them grazing is good. And they'll probably believe us because they won't be able to think anymore. So it's going to be perfect. And then they said, okay, we got another problem because iodine is actually in everybody's medicine chest around the United States, and they carry it to war because if they're going to chop off a leg even in our Civil War, I used to think it was whiskey that kept those guys alive because I saw the saws and the movies and everything. Well, it was actually iodine. The medics carried a canteen of iodine, and all the soldiers carried a little canteen of iodine. They told the soldiers, if you have to drink out of a well or a lake or a river, put a drop of iodine in it, and we'll kill all the pathogens in that. And then it's very safe for you to drink. So they had it to purify their water. Why didn't we think of iodine instead of fluoride? I don't know, because we knew about it, but we didn't think of it. And then, okay, with that, now we're going to look at what else do we do with that. We say, okay, this iodine, everybody's got it in their medicine chest. They know it's good for first aid. They put it on every bug bite, every wound, mercurochrome. You remember anything like that? Okay. So they said, this has got to go because iodine actually is another big part of your health. So they said, do an experiment. 1948, Wolff-Chaikoff experiment. They call it the Wolff-Chaikoff effect, and they teach every medical doctor, iodine is toxic. And they require you put skull and crossbones on all iodine products. Even though in 1848, a guy named Dr. Jean Lugel, physician in France, he figured out there was a way to get very safe iodine in the body, water soluble, twice as much potassium iodide, half as much iodine. It matches exactly what the body needs. If I just keep giving it to you, your body will keep taking it because every cell in your body needs it. And things that destroy iodine reserves are things like radiation. Do we have any of that in our lives? Your cell phone, perhaps? Fukushima? Just saying, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl. They were testing bombs all over the place in the Southwest. That knocks it out. That's why the Japanese didn't have to move out after the first 2 bombs were dropped. They just passed out potassium iodide and they said, eat more of your sushi, eat more seaweed, and you'll be fine. And that's what they did. So the ones that weren't incinerated lived, survived, live without massive cancer problems. It's pretty impressive. They're there now. Fukushima is 6 bombs going off every single day, all day long, 24 hours a day, flooding into the ocean, flooding into the air. They were going to evacuate and they said, no, we did it once before, we can do it again. It would be shameful to leave our country. Wasn't our fault there was an earthquake. We'll stay here, we'll get through it, we'll deal with it. So they're doing it again. They have 100 times more iodine in their bodies than anybody else on the planet. And they are quite healthy as a result of that. So these guys said iodine is toxic. They basically used a kind of iodine that everybody knew was toxic. And of course, it was toxic. Duh, you know? And they said, now tell everybody, get rid of your iodine. And so the bottles that were in your cabinet when you went and bought it again had skull and crossbones on it. And you've been putting it on everything. You're like, oh my God, it's poisonous. I shouldn't use that anymore. What else do you have for me? I'm sure we made something else. But when you go for surgery, they still paint you with a big sponge full of iodine. That's how you survive. Wait a second. So let's talk about what else happened. So after the scientists finished creating fake fats, trans fats and saturated fats, they said, this food tastes like doo-doo, our like TV dinners, right? Because we need a convenience, the soap operas, they're watching, they're learning how do I satisfy my husband, I give him a meal, he watches TV instead of sits with me. It's going to be great. Okay, so we gotta fake it up really good. So we hire a bunch of chemists and we say, we need you to make them like this food because the first TV dinners, who can remember them? They were disgusting. They were like mushy, everything tasted the same, but they did tell you to put them in the oven. We didn't have a microwave yet. So at least you cooked them the normal way. But over the times, they got really savvy and they created these things called excitotoxins, which not only make food taste amazing to your brain, but make real food, this food, taste like garbage. So that food tastes so strong, this food doesn't taste good. If you give up the excitotoxins, very quickly, your brain goes, oh my God, this is so much better. So you will actually change your mind as soon as you change your diet. Just takes a little while. But excitotoxins, MSG, and many, many, many other components to it. They also made the preservatives, they made the color, they made the enhancers, the firmers, the toners, the smoothers, the softeners, the blah, 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 blah. None of that was in that food, so it shouldn't really be in what we eat. But we buy it because we like those things. They also said to the farmers, why don't you just put the pesticides and the herbicides right in the animals because they're all getting sick anyways. And this way, if there's bugs in the animals, maybe you can kill them in the animals before we kill the animals themselves. The animals barely live past their extermination date. If you didn't exterminate them within a week, all the chickens die anyhow of horrible, nasty diseases and viruses, which we all have. So you can do the math on that. I don't know. Out with the fats, in with the sugars. Fats good, sugars bad. Sugars cause inflammation. Dr. Lustig, The Bitter Truth About Sugar. You can find it free on YouTube. Fantastic. Addictions. How many of our kids are addicted? We first got them heroin addicted onto these sugars and sodas and things like that, and then they went to the next step. And sometimes they maybe broke a bone and we said, how about a little bit of a narcotic, you know, Tylenol with codeine or something like that. So, you know, and then we said, you can experiment with whatever you want while you're at school, feeling miserable, eat like a dozen donuts every night. I remember that, right? Ice cream, you know, these kids can eat pizza. They live on pizza all day long. So honestly, is anybody teaching anybody anything about real nutrition? No. So everybody goes crazy. How many of our kids are we losing? How many people are we losing this country to addictions? It goes from sugar right into much, much worse. Monsanto shows up. It was George Bush Sr. that approved them to go green light. on GMOs and go ahead and increase the volume of all things related to glyphosate or Roundup Ready. They spray fields multiple times. You're supposed to spray less, but now we spray more. Glyphosates actually are entering your DNA code and replacing glycine. And so you're not making proper proteins, which is destroying a lot of things in the body, and it's very hard to detect. But this is, you accumulate this, you can't get rid of it. It's getting into the DNA, you ain't getting rid of it then. So you got to be careful to avoid that, and that means avoiding all grain products. Out. And you can trust a lot of it. Because right before, let's say for wheat, it's not quote unquote GMO'd, even though they multiplied the head on the wheat. They took the gluten gene out, they split it up 4 times and put it back in there. So we have all the energy in the wheat plant goes to the sugar, none to the protein. So the willowy fields of grain that we have in our song, they were now they're little stalks that are hollow, and they're the size of the combines that go over them, so they break up really easy. And the seeds explode. Why? Because we spray them with Roundup Ready to kill them and all the weeds right before the tractors go through. So we are not doing farming to make it nutritious or to make it good for us. We are doing farming to make it easy for industrial people to make a big profit. It's a problem. So desiccation is the practice of widespread spraying grain crops right before you harvest. And then the last thing I put there, chemtrails, we'll leave it at that. Yep. Oh, I forgot one little story. Bromide. So up around the Great Lakes, we had a problem in this country with goiter in the 1950s after everybody came home from the war. So we have iodine in the 2 oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, but the Great Lakes are glacier. So there's no iodine in the Great Lakes. So therefore, when the water gets picked up and dropped on the land, there's no iodine in the soil. Now, farmers used to pay to add minerals like iodine to their soil, but if iodine is toxic, I don't think I want to be adding it to my soil anymore now, do I? So when they pronounced it in 1948 toxic, well, now we don't have to supply that. And in fact, corn requires 6 minerals, that's it. So if we grow mostly corn, we don't care if we grow it in dust, sand if we could. Just throw 6 minerals in there to grow the corn. So it's really a barren crop. And we all love it, especially sugar. So what I want to do now is ask if there's any questions, and then we'll take a break.